So I was actually on the verge of skipping this video entirely because, as you know, stock on these cards are extremely low, so putting this video out would be pretty much useless. There's only like a few hundred people in the entire world that can get their hands on this card, but I'm hoping this video will reach someone in the near future where stock is back to normal. So we do have 5 different 5080s here, which I'll be comparing with each other. We have the Founders Edition, the ROG Astral, Palit GameRock, MSI Gaming Trio, and the AORUS Master. This video is sponsored by VIPYourCDKey.com. If you're building yourself a PC or you're looking to upgrade Windows, do not pay full price for a key, and instead pick them up from here. They have legit Windows 10 Pro keys as well as Windows 11 Pro keys for dirt cheap. Using the code TS20, you'll get a nice discount. And after checking out, they will send you instructions on how to retrieve the key within a minute. And afterwards, all you have to do is go into the activation settings and put it in, and you're good to go. So kicking off with the Palit GameRock, this is the shiniest 50 series cards among the rest, with this really cool chameleon panel that changes colors depending on the viewing angle. This is actually one of the cards that looks cool turned off as it does on. However, with that said, if you guys are going with a specific color scheme, then this card will throw it off, even if the lights are turned off. This is one of the cards where you want it mounted horizontally if you're going with a particular color scheme. One thing to keep in mind is that this is a chunky 3.5 slot card, which means it will use up 4 PCI brackets in your case, and most of these cards will come with an included SAC bracket to help prevent damage to the PCI slot on your motherboard. You also get a narrow mouse pad for some reason. I'm not sure where in the world this will actually be useful, but it's nice to have, I guess. The GameRock will require a PCI Gen 5 cable with 600 watts to fully power the card, or you can use the ugly adapter cable and plug in triple 8-pin PCI connectors instead. Right next to the port is an ARGB header where you can plug directly into the motherboard, and you can control the lights via your motherboard software. In the back, you get a single HDMI 2.1B and 3 DisplayPort 2.1B ports, which now supports up to 4K at 480 Hz or 8K at 165. Next up, we have quite possibly the most talked about 50 series cards, which is also the most expensive, the ROG Astral, which is ROG's flagship model that sits right above the Strix. This is an absolute unit of a GPU, which is a 3.8 slot card and comes equipped with quad fans. We got 3 intake on the bottom and 1 more exhaust on the top, which is set to boost airflow and pressure by up to 20%, improving thermal performance by 10%. It also has powerful 80 amp MOSFETs, which is set to deliver over 35% more headroom, and that's supposed to transfer to a higher overclocking potential. It's also the most expensive RTX 5080 in existence, with an MSRP of $1,500, so there's gotta be something to justify the price, right? I guess we'll find out on the benchmarks later in the video. But in terms of design, I do have to say this is a much better design compared to their previous Strix lineup, because they finally got rid of the nasty, horrendous red and blue color scheme. I don't know who at ASUS thought it would be a great idea to put blue and red together on a graphics card. Like, this would throw off the color scheme of every single PC that this was a part of, unless you mounted it horizontally, of course. But yeah, personally, I think this is a much better design choice. Now we get more of a neutral color scheme with an RGB accent strip near the edge. It's also worth noting that most of these cards, including the Astral lineup, will come with dual BIOSes, which lets you decide between quiet mode or performance mode. Quiet mode keeps the cards at less aggressive fan curves, which keeps the noise levels down, while performance mode lets the fans spin up to keep the card running cool at all time. And by default, the cards do come with performance mode on. Actually, one more thing to point out, the Astral is the only card from today's video that has an extra HDMI port in the back, which is perfect for those running Penta displays. Inside the box, you get the usual cable adapter, a tiny little Astral keycap decor, and a hard ruler for some reason. Now, the AORUS Master in white is actually my favorite card from this list for obvious reasons. This is also a 3.5 slot card, but the design is much nicer in my opinion. RGB halo looks absolutely stunning once lit up, but sadly the shutter speed of my camera isn't able to do it justice. I think the lighting on this card is not overly done. It's perfectly balanced, but the coolest feature I think is the LCD Edge View, which lets you show off hardware information, text, pictures, and GIFs. I would say this is one of the few cards that has to be mounted vertically so you can see both the RGB halos and the LCD screen. In the back, you get the same exact ports as the rest, and you also get dual BIOS support. In the box, you do get an additional 120mm fan to add on top of your card if you're going with the horizontal orientation, and this will basically just help dissipate the heat through the heatsink more efficiently, which will provide slightly cooler temps. You also get the white cable adapter, which I thought was really nice, and some sag bracket accessories. And finally, we got the MSI Gaming Trio OC, which is the smallest and lightest card from the bunch because it is a 2-slot card, and naturally it is the cheapest as well. I paid $1,220 for this card from Newegg. So the design is pretty simple, nothing really exciting about it. There's a dragon logo that blocks a small portion of the exhaust vents near the back, and some subtle RGB accents with an RGB MSI logo on the side. I will be testing all these cards along with the 5080 Founders Edition just so we can see how much more faster these board partner cards are given the higher MSRP. And this is the test bed that I'll be using to test all the cards. It is my current system with a 9800X 3D processor, 64 gigs of memory running at 6400 megahertz. And do keep in mind that this is an open air case, so thermals are going to be cooler compared to a traditional case. Also, all the benchmarks are without any DLSS 4 and frame gen enabled. We are only looking at pure rasterization performance. I mean, obviously, if you enable DLSS 4 and frame gen, you will basically double the frames at the cost of higher latency. But if you guys are interested in upscaling tests, do let me know in the comment section. So kicking off with Cyberpunk 2077 in ultra settings, once again no DLSS enabled, we can see that MSI did the worst compared to all the other cards in 1440p with an average of 148 FPS. And the best performing card was the AORUS Master with 162 FPS, which is about a 5% improvement over the Founders Edition. Switching over to 4K, we can see MSI again at the bottom, but not by much compared to the Founders. However, the Astral took the lead in 4K with an average of 89 frames per second, making it about 9% faster than the Founders on stock. Switching over to God of War Ragnarok, ultra settings 1440p, we can see AORUS on the bottom this time around with 165 FPS, followed closely by MSI. And surprisingly, the Founders did the best with an average of 173 frames per second. Increasing the quality to 4K, we can see AORUS taking the lead with 107 FPS, making it about 7% faster than the Founders Edition on stock. But what's interesting is that the Founders Edition did worse on God of War in 4K resolution. Moving on to Marvel Rivals, ultra settings in 1440p, the Palit did the best at 109 FPS, but not by much considering the rest of the cards are within 5%, which is considered within margin of error. And in 4K resolution, we can see pretty much all the cards performing right around the same with an average of 65 frames per second. Hogwarts Legacy in 1440p showed the Founders Edition on the bottom with an average of 173 FPS, followed by the MSI card at 177, with AORUS taking the lead at 187 frames per second, making it about 8% faster than the Founders Edition. In 4K, the frames pretty much balance out and all the cards perform roughly the same with an average of 55 FPS. Last but not least, I also tested the cards with the new Star Wars Outlaws, and in ultra settings 1440p, most of the cards perform the same within the margin of error, with the MSI scoring an average of 5 FPS less than the rest. In 4K resolution, we are seeing much of the same story as well, with all the cards performing the same. If you look at the average frames in 1440p, both the Astral and the AORUS had the most frames across the 5 games tested, but when we average it out, they all perform within 5% of each other. But in 4K, the margin is much less. So if you're planning on picking up a 5080 to game in 4K at stock settings, then it doesn't really matter which card you go with. It would ultimately come down to which design you prefer and what the price will be, assuming there's even stock in the first place. Now, overclocking is where I had the most fun because that is where I saw most of the gains coming from. On the Founders Edition, I was able to max out the memory and add an extra 400 megahertz on the boost clock, allowing the card to achieve pretty close to 3100 megahertz on some games. However, this was the lowest among the rest of the cards I've overclocked in the video. The best overclocker from today's video was hands down the Astral 5080, achieving stable clock speeds of 3277 megahertz. This translated to a nice boost in performance in both 1440p and 4K. In 1440p, the Founders Edition was an average of 10% faster overclocked compared to stock. The Astral saw the most gains after overclocked, with an average of 13% more performance compared to stock when we look at the 5-game average. Then followed the AORUS Master and the Palit GameRock. Now switching over to 4K, we can see the most gains came from the Astral card once again, with 10% more performance overclocked compared to stock. I guess we now know the reason why this card is the most expensive out of the other 50. But is the extra 20% MSRP cost worth it for slightly more performance. I guess that's up to you guys to decide. Now in terms of temps, the hottest card tested was the Founders Edition with peak temps of 70 degrees on stock, followed closely by MSI. The coolest card running stock was the AORUS Master with only 60 degrees Celsius. After overclocking, the FE shot up to 77 degrees Celsius, while the rest of the cards only saw an increase of 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. It's worth mentioning that I left the fan speed on auto for all the overclocking tests because I don't like maxing out the fan speed, which makes the PC sound like a jet engine, which isn't a realistic user experience. For those who prefer much cooler temps, in exchange for a louder fan noise, you're more than welcome to set a more aggressive fan curve during the overclock. But for these tests, I set the fan speed to auto. Speaking of sound, the quietest card from the list was the MSI Gaming Trio, and the loudest card was the Astral, coming in at 57 decibels. So yeah, just to recap, all these cards will pretty much perform within 5% of each other in 4K resolution, but overclocking is where the magic is. That's where most of the performance comes from. So if you guys do get a 5080, I do recommend overclocking your card because it's basically just free performance in exchange for like an average of 25 watts of more power. Might as well take advantage of the extra headroom that NVIDIA is giving you, given that you have proper cooling in your case, of course. The ROG Astral is the fastest card and the best overclocker compared to the rest, but it's also the most expensive. So ultimately, it does come down to retail prices, availability, and if you like the design. If you guys enjoyed this video or you thought it was helpful, consider tossing a like. I haven't slept properly in 3 days making this video, so hopefully you guys appreciate it. If you're also interested in the RTX 5070 Ti, which is coming very soon, consider subscribing because I got a video coming up on that as well. Thanks so much for watching as always, and I'll see you very soon in the next one. Time to go to sleep.